couple at the dog park sobbed over my golden retriever, showed me photos, and offered $5,000, saying I'd saved their baby's life. When I refused the money and handed them his leash, the husband smiled and said, "You're a good person. Not many people would do this." I just stood there in the empty park, trying not to cry. That was 10 months ago. Yesterday, I watched him sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. How far would you go for your dog? Last month at the dog park, this couple approached me while I was throwing a tennis ball for my dog Waffle. The woman immediately started sobbing when she saw him. Her husband had his arm around her shoulders and explained through his own tears that I had their dog, their baby, who'd escaped from their backyard, and they'd been searching everywhere since. I'd found Waffle wandering around the parking lot behind my apartment building 6 months ago, no collar, ribs showing through his matted fur, and figured someone had dumped him. The husband pulled out his phone, showing me dozens of photos that definitely looked like Waffle playing in their backyard, swimming in their pool, sleeping on their couch. He said his name was Cooper, and when he called that name, Waffle's ears perked up and he barked, which made my stomach drop because I'd been so sure he was abandoned. The wife was crying into Waffle's fur while he licked her face, and her husband pulled out his wallet and started counting $100 bills. "We'll give you $5,000 for him," he said, his hands shaking as he held out the cash. "I know you've been taking care of him, and we want to reimburse you for everything, food and vet bills and your time, because you saved our baby's life. We thought our lives were over when he got out." I stared at the money feeling sick because I didn't want their money, and I definitely didn't want to give up Waffle. This dog had been my only friend through the worst breakup of my life, sleeping next to me every night when I couldn't stop crying about my ex, forcing me to go outside when I wanted to rot in bed forever. But watching this woman sob while showing me more photos of their family vacations with him made my chest hurt. These people were destroyed by losing their dog, and here I was keeping him from his real family when I'd just been the person who found him. If they were willing to pay $5,000 just to get him back, he must mean everything to them. I told them to keep their money and just take him, that I was glad he had people who loved him that much. The woman hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe while thanking me over and over. Waffle kept looking back at me as I handed his leash to the husband, probably confused about why I wasn't coming with them. The woman coaxed him toward their car with an excited voice, telling him they were going home. I told myself he'd be happier with his real family, with a yard and another dog to play with like in their photos. The husband shook my hand and said, "You're a good person. Not many people would do this." And I stood there in the empty dog park trying not to cry, but I couldn't stop myself. Waffle was such a good dog, and I'd had no idea when we woke up that that was my last day with him. The next 3 weeks were exactly as horrible as I expected. I kept looking for Waffle every time I opened my door, kept saving bacon scraps before remembering he wasn't there to beg for them. I bought a goldfish just to have something alive in my apartment, but it wasn't the same as having someone genuinely excited to see me exist. I started taking different routes home to avoid the dog park and threw out his bed because looking at it made me want to scream. But I told myself at least he was back where he belonged. I kept hoping I'd hear from his family, that maybe they'd send me a picture of him all settled in, but they never did. Then yesterday I was scrolling through Nextdoor looking for a used coffee table when I saw a post that made me drop my phone. Someone had written, "Warning, dog kidnappers active in our neighborhood," with a blurry security camera photo attached. The post explained that criminals were stealing purebred dogs from yards and dog parks, then selling them to puppy mills and collectors overseas for massive profits. They worked in pairs, usually a couple, and used fake sob stories about losing their beloved pet to guilt owners into giving up their dogs. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the photo to enlarge it. Even with the terrible quality, I could see it was them, the same couple from the dog park, leading someone else's German Shepherd into the same car Waffle had climbed into. The post said golden retrievers like mine were especially valuable, particularly the English cream variety, which could sell for $20,000 to collectors in China. I hadn't even known Waffle was anything special, just thought he was a regular golden retriever who needed a home. They'd stolen my dog by pretending to love him, using my own decency against me, and were probably selling him to some puppy mill where he'd spend his life in a cage. These people were professional criminals who'd studied me and Waffle, planned their approach, and executed it perfectly while I stood there believing their whole sob story. I'd been scammed by actual dog kidnappers who were going to sell the only living thing that had kept me sane this year. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. There was no way I was letting them sell Waffle to some collector. No way I was letting him disappear into some underground pet trafficking ring. I was going to find these people and get my dog back, even if it meant becoming a criminal myself. My fingers were shaking so bad I could barely hit the screenshot button on my phone, but I needed proof of what I was seeing. I searched dog trafficking rings Portland, Oregon, and my stomach dropped when dozens of articles popped up from the past year, all describing the exact same scam. Couples approaching people at dog parks with fake sob stories about their lost pet, then selling the dogs overseas for huge profits. One article said English cream golden retrievers like Waffle could go for $20,000 to collectors in China, and most were probably already shipped out within days of being stolen. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up everything in my stomach, thinking about Waffle in some cargo container heading across the ocean. Back on Nextdoor, I clicked on the guy who posted the warning and saw Connor Mitchell had been tracking this couple for weeks, with 3 different posts showing security footage of them leading away different dogs. I messaged him explaining they'd taken my dog 3 weeks ago, and within 5 minutes he sent back an address where his neighbor had spotted their car yesterday. At 2 in the morning, I drove to the address with my headlights off and parked down the street from a regular-looking house with all the lights off. A white van sat in the driveway with fresh mud on the tires, and when I crept closer, I could see dog hair all over the back window and seats. I snapped photos of the license plate with my flash off, but a motion sensor light suddenly blazed on, and I ran back to my car with my heart pounding. Back in my apartment, I sat on my couch holding Waffle's collar that I'd kept in my nightstand drawer, and remembered how he'd slept next to me every single night after my ex left, how he'd rest his head on my chest when I couldn't stop crying, and force me to get up and walk him even when I wanted to die. I wasn't going to let these people sell him to some collector, and I'd do whatever it took to get him back even if the cops wouldn't help. Sleep never came that night, and I just sat there planning what to do next. I called in sick to work the next morning and spent hours searching public records for the van's license plate until I found it registered to something called Premium Pet Services, LLC. The business address led to an industrial area 20 minutes away with no website or reviews or anything except a business registration from from 8 months ago. I drove there around noon and found a warehouse with no signs, but I could hear barking from inside even with all the doors closed. Through a dirty window, I saw rows of wire cages stacked 3 high with different breeds of dogs, and my heart started racing when I spotted a golden retriever in the corner cage. I couldn't tell if it was Waffle from that distance, but the dog was the right size and color and kept pawing at the cage door. I called the police non-emergency line from my car and explained everything to the operator, who said animal control would investigate within 72 hours. When I mentioned dog trafficking and stolen pets being shipped overseas, she told me to file an online report and basically brushed me off. That evening, I sat in my empty apartment staring at Waffle's food bowl still sitting in the corner where I'd left it 3 weeks ago. The cops weren't going to do anything for days, and by then the dogs could be on a ship to China. I pulled out my phone and texted Alex, my old roommate from before my ex moved in, just 5 words that I never thought I'd send. Alex showed up an hour later wearing all black and carrying a crowbar without even asking what was going on at first. When I explained about Waffle being stolen and the warehouse full of dogs, Alex's face went dark, and they mentioned their cousin worked at the port. The cousin had been talking about weird pet shipments to Asia that didn't match the paperwork, and the next cargo ship was leaving in 48 hours. The next morning, Alex and I parked across from the warehouse at 6 a.m. with coffee and notebooks to document everyone who came and went. Around noon, a familiar car pulled up, and my whole body tensed when I saw them get out. The woman I'd sobbed and thanked for finding her lost dog was carrying a small, white, fluffy dog that definitely wasn't there yesterday, while the man checked his phone and pointed at the warehouse door. They disappeared inside, and Alex started typing notes on his phone about the time and the new dog while I kept watching the door. 20 minutes later, they came back out without any dogs and drove away in their car. We waited another hour, but nothing else happened, so Alex said we should follow them to see where they went next. Wonder why someone willing to pay $5,000 cash wouldn't have their contact info ready, or even ask for the narrator's number to send updates. The whole crying performance seems pretty perfect for making someone feel guilty, especially targeting someone alone at a dog park who clearly loves their pet and watching them interact first before approaching. We got in his car and stayed 3 cars behind them as they drove across town to Riverside Park, where tons of people walk their dogs on weekends. The parking lot was packed, and we watched them get out and start walking the paths like they were just another couple enjoying the sunny afternoon. Near the duck pond, I saw them stop and approach an old man sitting on a bench with a beautiful black and tan Shiba Inu on a red leash. The woman sat down next to him and immediately started crying while pulling out her phone to show him something on the screen. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and started recording video, while Alex moved closer to hear what they were saying. The woman was sobbing about losing her precious Kiko, and the man was showing her photos that must have looked convincing because the old guy's face went soft and he started patting her shoulder. She kept pointing at his dog and crying harder while her partner stood there looking sad and supportive. The old man was nodding and starting to unhook his dog's leash when I couldn't take it anymore and ran over yelling that these were the dog thieves from next door. Everyone in the park turned to look at us, and the woman's crying stopped instantly like someone had flipped a switch. The man's face went hard and cold as he recognized me from the dog park last month. "You should mind your own business," he said quietly, while grabbing the woman's arm and pulling her toward the parking lot. They walked fast without looking back, while the old man sat there confused and shaking. His name was Harold, and when I showed him the next door post on my phone, his eyes filled with tears. He kept saying Koji was all he had left since his wife died last year, and he couldn't believe he almost gave him away to criminals. I gave him Connor's phone number and the warehouse address, and told him to report what happened to the police. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Waffle locked in that warehouse, so I drove back alone with bolt cutters I'd bought at the hardware store. The place looked empty and dark as I walked up to the chain link fence ready to cut through. That's when I heard it, a double bark that made my whole body freeze because I'd know that sound anywhere. Waffle was inside and alive, but as I lifted the bolt cutters, I noticed something I hadn't seen during the day. Security cameras mounted on every corner of the building pointing right at the fence. I backed away slowly and got in my car with my heart pounding because breaking in would just get me arrested and wouldn't help Waffle at all. Back in my apartment, I searched online for pet theft investigations and found articles mentioning Detective Ray Holloway, who specialized in these cases. I called the number listed and left a message explaining everything that had happened. He called back the next morning sounding interested, but said they needed more evidence for a warrant than just my video, and suggested I check veterinary records for microchip fraud, since these criminals often remove chips to resell the dogs. 3 days later, I was on my 4th veterinary clinic with Waffle's old medical records and his photo when Dr. Sarah Nguyen at Riverside Animal Hospital looked at the picture and stopped typing. She said a couple had brought in a golden retriever last week, claiming his microchip was causing infections and needed removal, which she'd done even though the dog looked perfectly healthy. She still had the chip in a drawer because something about the situation felt wrong, and when she scanned it, the ID number matched Waffle's records exactly. She printed out the security footage showing the same couple from the park with my dog and said she'd provide a sworn statement to the police about what happened. I called Ray immediately, and he said with the vet evidence he could get a warrant, but the legal process would take 48 to 72 hours minimum. My stomach dropped when he mentioned seeing shipping manifests showing a cargo ship to Asia leaving in 36 hours, because that meant Waffle could be gone forever before the warrant came through. That night, I couldn't sleep and spent hours scrolling through old videos of Waffle on my phone, including one where he was playing with my ex's dog in her backyard. I realized I hadn't thought about my ex in days, because finding Waffle had taken over my entire life, and nothing else mattered anymore. The next morning, Connor messaged me saying he'd organized 12 other pet owners who'd been scammed, and they were planning to protest outside the warehouse to get media attention. My first thought was that this could spook the criminals into moving all the dogs immediately before we could save them, but Connor said doing nothing wasn't an option either. I spent 20 minutes on the phone with Connor explaining that if we showed up with signs and cameras, Noah and Elena would just move the dogs somewhere else before police could get there. He kept saying we needed to do something now, but I told him we needed to be smart about this. Finally, he agreed to wait one day if we could watch the warehouse ourselves to make sure nothing happened. Within an hour, Connor had 12 people signed up for shifts, with Harold and his son taking the overnight watch since Harold couldn't sleep anyway after losing his beagle. I was parked across from the warehouse when Alex called me with news that made my hands go numb. Their cousin who worked at the port had just sent over a shipping manifest showing Premium Services had booked container space for 47 agricultural products on a cargo ship leaving tomorrow for Shanghai. The container was already at the port waiting to be loaded, which meant they were moving the dogs tonight. I immediately called Detective Ray, who picked up on the second ring even though it was past 7. He said the warrant was still being processed, but gave me his personal cell number and told me to call if I saw them moving any dogs. His voice had this tone like he knew we weren't going to listen when he said not to try stopping them ourselves. Around 10 that night, Harold texted our group chat that a big truck just pulled up to the warehouse. I drove over there so fast I ran 2 red lights and parked behind a dumpster where I could see everything. Noah and Elena were loading cages into the truck, while 2 other guys helped them. I counted at least 30 cages being carried out, and each one had a dog inside barking and crying. When I called Detective Ray, he said he was 20 minutes out and to absolutely not engage with them under any circumstances. But then I saw them carrying out a cage with golden fur pressed against the bars. Even in the dark, I could see it was Waffle, and he was limping, favoring his back leg like something had happened to him. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel, as every part of me wanted to run over there and grab him. The truck started moving, and I couldn't just sit there watching them take him to some ship. I followed the truck, staying 2 cars behind while calling Alex to meet me at the port. Connor's group was going crazy in the group chat with everyone saying they were heading there too. Detective Ray kept texting me to wait for backup and not do anything stupid, but I wasn't letting that truck out of my sight. The port entrance only had 1 security guard who was watching something on his phone when the truck rolled through. Noah handed him some papers, and the guard barely looked up before waving them through. I parked outside the fence watching through the chain link as they started loading the cages into a shipping container. Alex pulled up next to me carrying bolt cutters and said their cousin could mess with the crane controls to make it look broken. That would buy us maybe 30 minutes before someone could fix it, and their cousin was risking their whole job to help us. While we waited for the crane to break, I kept thinking about last summer when I taught Waffle how to swim at the lake. He was so scared of the water at first, paddling like crazy whenever his feet couldn't touch the bottom. The idea of him trapped in a cage on a ship for weeks, probably seasick and terrified, made me want to throw up. The crane suddenly jerked to a stop while lifting the container, leaving it hanging 20 feet in the air. Noah started screaming at the port workers while Elena was on her phone, probably calling someone to fix it. In all the chaos with workers running around trying to figure out what was wrong, Alex and I slipped through a gap in the fence where the security camera was pointed the wrong way. The shipping container was still on the ground with its doors partially open, and I could hear dogs barking from inside. Alex pulled the container door open wider, and the smell hit us like a wall. This mix of piss and fear and something worse that made me gag. Inside was darker than I expected, but my phone flashlight showed metal cages stacked 3 high along both walls, with dogs crammed inside each one. Some cages had 2 or 3 dogs pressed together, and there weren't any water bowls anywhere, just dogs panting in the heat with their tongues hanging out. I started counting while Alex moved down the row looking for Waffle, and got to 43 dogs before I saw him in a middle cage on the left side. His tail started wagging weakly when he saw me, but he looked terrible, his fur matted and dirty, and when I got closer I could see his ribs showing through his coat. My hands were shaking as I started taking photos of everything with my phone, making sure to get clear shots of the bloody paws pressed against cage bars, the patches of missing fur on several dogs, the infected eyes crusted shut on a small terrier in the bottom row. Alex was working on Waffle's cage lock with some tool from his pocket, while I documented every single thing that would prove what these people were doing. Each photo made me angrier because this wasn't just theft anymore. This was straight up torture, and I knew these images would guarantee prison time for Noah and Elena. The crane breaking at just the right moment feels awfully convenient, doesn't it? Makes me wonder if Alex's cousin really exists, or if there's something else going on here with the timing of everything suddenly working out perfectly. The container door suddenly blocked more light, and Elena stood there frozen, staring at us with her mouth open. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "These aren't people you want to cross. This is bigger than just us, bigger than you can imagine." She kept looking over her shoulder like someone might be watching, and I realized she was actually scared of whoever was really running this operation. Police sirens started wailing in the distance, and Elena's face went white before she turned and ran, her heels clicking on the concrete as she disappeared between the containers. I grabbed Waffle's cage door as Alex finally got it open, and he basically fell into my arms, his legs too weak to hold him up properly. Alex was already working on other locks, opening 5 more cages, and suddenly dogs were jumping out and running everywhere, barking and howling as they escaped into the port. Security guards came running from 3 directions trying to grab dogs, while more sirens got closer, and the whole place turned into complete chaos with dogs scattering between containers and workers trying to catch them. Ray showed up with 2 animal control vans and 4 police cars, officers spreading out to block exits while animal control people started corralling the loose dogs. Noah tried to run, but 2 officers tackled him next to his van, and when they searched it, they found stacks of paperwork that Ray showed me later. The documents had shipping schedules, buyer contacts, and records showing this was part of a West Coast network that had been stealing hundreds of dogs every month and shipping them overseas. Elena had vanished completely, but at least we had Noah and all the evidence from his van, plus my photos from inside the container. I sat on the ground holding Waffle, while a vet team that arrived with animal control examined him right there in the parking lot. He was dehydrated and had infected wounds on all 4 paws from the cage wire, and the vet said he'd lost at least 12 pounds since I'd seen him last. But when I talked to him, his tail still wagged, and when I said his name, his real name that I'd given him, his ears perked up and he licked my hand. The next morning at the emergency vet hospital, Sarah was treating Waffle and 14 other dogs we'd rescued from the container. She documented every single injury for the legal case, taking photos of wounds and malnutrition, and writing detailed reports about the abuse. While she worked, she told me that shipping records showed 7 dogs had already been sold and sent out on a vessel that left 3 days earlier, headed for ports in Asia. That night, I slept on the floor of the vet clinic next to Waffle's kennel because I couldn't leave him alone again. I kept waking up thinking about those 7 dogs on that ship, wondering if their owners were checking next door right now, posting about their missing pets and hoping hoping for miracles that wouldn't come because their dogs were already halfway across the Pacific. Ray interviewed me at the clinic the next day, while Waffle got IV fluids, asking detailed questions about everything I'd seen and done. Noah wasn't talking to anyone, but the paperwork from his van was telling the whole story, including Elena's real name, which turned out to be Anna Volkov. Ray said she was connected to a Russian pet trafficking syndicate that operated up and down the West Coast, and now the FBI was involved because this crossed state and international borders. Connor's group had already made the local news by that afternoon, and the clinic turned into a reunion scene as 12 families showed up to claim their stolen dogs. The news cameras captured people crying as they hugged dogs they thought they'd never see again, and the footage went viral within hours. But 28 dogs were still unclaimed, either because their owners lived in other cities or maybe didn't even know to look for them here. The next morning, an older man named Harold showed up at the clinic carrying 3 huge bags of homemade dog treats he'd baked for all the rescued dogs. His hands shook as he handed them to Sarah, and I watched tears run down his face when she brought out his beagle who'd been missing for 4 months. The dog went crazy, jumping all over him, and Harold kept saying, "You saved my reason for living," while hugging his dog so tight I thought he might never let go. Watching all these families get their dogs back made my chest feel heavy, because I kept thinking about what could have happened if we'd been even one day later. 3 days later, I tried going back to work, but couldn't focus on anything except checking my phone for updates about the case. My boss pulled me aside around lunch and said she understood what I was going through, but I'd already used all my sick days and vacation time. The vet bills for Waffle were over $8,000, and missing more work meant I wouldn't make rent next month. That same afternoon, Ray called to tell me Anna had been arrested at the Canadian border with 2 stolen dogs in her car. She'd immediately asked for a deal and claimed she could expose the entire trafficking network if they gave her immunity. Her lawyer contacted me the next day, saying Anna wanted to apologize to me in person at the federal detention center. Alex told me not to go, that it was probably just another manipulation, but I needed to hear what she had to say. The detention center was an hour away, and I sat across from her with thick glass between us while she cried real tears this time. She told me her real name was Elena, and she'd been forced into this by people threatening her family back in Russia. Her voice shook as she explained how Noah had connections to organized crime, and she'd seen what happened to people who tried to leave. I wanted to believe her, but kept remembering those practiced tears at the dog park when she'd stolen Waffle. Then she leaned forward and said there was a second warehouse in Seattle with more dogs scheduled for shipment next week. She gave me the exact address and said Noah's brother ran that location with even more dogs than the Portland warehouse. I called Detective Holloway immediately from the parking lot and gave him everything Elena had told me. The Seattle raid happened 2 days later, and they rescued 62 dogs plus arrested 4 more people, including Noah's brother. Ray called me that night to confirm they'd found detailed records showing some dogs had been stolen over a year ago. Meanwhile, Waffle finally came home after a week of treatment at Sarah's clinic, but he wasn't the same dog anymore. He flinched when I moved too fast and wouldn't leave my side even to go to the bathroom. The golden retriever who used to love everyone now growled at strangers and hid behind my legs when anyone approached. Sarah had warned me the trauma would take time to heal, but seeing him so scared broke my heart all over again. Connor's group started a GoFundMe for my vet bills that raised $15,000 in 2 days after the news coverage went national. Strangers from all over the country sent messages sharing their own stories of lost pets and thanking me for exposing the trafficking ring. One message stood out from a woman in California whose dog had disappeared the same way 8 months ago from a dog park in San Diego. 2 weeks later, I sat in the federal courthouse for Noah's first hearing, where he pleaded not guilty to all charges. His expensive lawyer argued the dogs were just abandoned property, and this was a simple business dispute, not a federal crime. The prosecutor showed photos from the warehouse, and Noah's face stayed completely blank, like he was bored by the whole thing. After the hearing, Sarah introduced me to Jasmine Torres, a vet tech from her clinic who specialized in helping traumatized animals. Jasmine started coming to my apartment 3 times a week to work with Waffle using special techniques to help him feel safe again. She'd sit on my floor for hours, letting him approach at his own pace and teaching me how to help him relax. Slowly, after weeks of patience, Waffle started to trust her, and she became the first stranger he'd accepted since the warehouse. One morning, I decided to try the dog park again, since we'd been avoiding it for weeks. The second we walked through the gate, Waffle pressed against my legs and started shaking. Other dogs ran around playing, but he just stood there frozen, his tail tucked between his legs. We lasted maybe 5 minutes before I gave up and took him home. Connor called that afternoon asking if I wanted to join a support group he was starting for people whose dogs got taken by the ring. 15 of us showed up to the first meeting at a community center, all telling the same stories about our dogs being too scared to play anymore. People shared tips about special food that helped with anxiety, and trainers who knew about trauma in animals. Connor's dog still wouldn't let strangers touch him 3 months later. Everyone kept saying how the legal stuff was taking forever, and the cops weren't telling them anything. That night I was checking my email when a message popped up with no sender name. My blood went cold when I opened it and saw photos of me at my apartment building, at the grocery store, at the vet clinic with Waffle. The message said, "You cost us millions. Drop the charges or lose more than your dog." My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial Holloway's number. She showed up at my apartment an hour later with 3 FBI agents who started checking everything with these weird devices. They found one bug behind my TV and another in my kitchen light fixture. The lead agent said I'd been monitored since the warehouse rescue, and this was now witness intimidation on top of everything else. They wanted me to go into protective custody, but I told them there was no way I was leaving Waffle. Alex showed up the next day with a duffel bag and said he was moving in until this was over. Elena's sudden appearance claiming these people are dangerous seems awfully convenient after she already got caught. Makes me wonder if she's playing another angle here, especially with how quickly she disappeared when the sirens started getting close to the scene. We spent the whole weekend installing cameras, changing all the locks, and setting up different routes to take when walking Waffle. My boss let me work from home after I explained what was happening. What started as just trying to save my dog had turned into living like someone was always watching me. Late at night, I'd watch Waffle sleeping next to my bed, his paws twitching and whimpering in his dreams. I wondered if he was dreaming about the warehouse, about being stuck in that cage, about the ship that almost took him away. Sometimes he'd wake up panicked and I'd have to calm him down for 20 minutes. Recovery wasn't working the same time for both of us. A month later, Jasmine called saying she wanted to foster some of the dogs that nobody had claimed yet. She came over and we started working together to help them trust people again. Waffle surprised me by actually playing with one of the foster dogs, the first time he'd played with another dog since everything happened. We were making progress when the prosecutor called with bad news. Noah's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the whole case, claiming I broke the law by entering the shipping container without permission. The prosecutor said this could mess up the federal case if the judge agreed that they got the evidence illegally. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, a woman from California messaged me saying she was flying to Portland with proof about her dog. She showed up at my apartment with a folder full of receipts, printed emails, and even a recording of someone admitting they sold her dog through Noah's network. Her evidence connected Noah to dog thefts in 3 different states, which made the federal case way stronger. The prosecutor was excited about this new proof. Jasmine suggested taking Waffle to the beach to help him relax since he used to love swimming. We drove out to the coast, but when we got there, Waffle wouldn't go near the water. He just stood on the sand watching the waves like he forgot how to be a normal dog. Then a piece of driftwood floated by and something clicked in his brain. He ran into the water, grabbed the stick, and brought it back with his tail actually wagging for real, not the nervous half-wag he'd been doing. We stayed at the beach until sunset watching him play like his old self, and I actually felt hope for the first time since this whole mess started. The next morning, Ray called saying Anna wanted to testify via video link from federal custody about the whole operation. We watched from the prosecutor's office as she sat in an orange jumpsuit, telling the grand jury how the network worked in 12 cities, with Portland being their West Coast hub. She named 17 more people involved, dealers in Seattle, Sacramento, Vegas, showing photos on her lawyer's laptop of warehouses where they kept the stolen dogs before shipping them out. The prosecutor kept asking for more names, and Anna kept giving them, each one making the case bigger and more complicated. Ray pulled me aside afterward and said with everything expanding like this, Noah's trial could be delayed for years while they sorted through all the new defendants. The witness intimidation charges would probably get tried separately from the pet theft charges, and the system was set up to protect the accused way more than victims like me. He said I should prepare myself for a long wait before seeing any real justice. 3 days later, Connor called at 2 in the morning because his security camera caught 2 men taking photos of my apartment building from a van with tinted windows. The license plate tracking showed they were private investigators hired by Noah's defense team to document my daily routine for the trial. Totally legal but creepy as hell, knowing strangers were watching me and taking notes about when I left for work or walked Waffle. I started having panic attacks in parking lots after that, always checking for vans with dark windows, jumping when car doors slammed behind me. Waffle had the same problem, going stiff whenever we passed white vans, pulling me away from them with his whole body shaking. We were both broken in the same ways now, scared of the same things, bonded by trauma instead of just love. 2 months passed with lawyers filing motions and counter motions while we tried to get back to normal life. Then Jasmine called with good news for once, saying 3 of the unclaimed dogs from the warehouse had been reunited with their real owners through microchip databases. A family from Washington got their Bernese Mountain Dog back after 8 months, and watching the reunion video made me cry because the dog went crazy with joy seeing his kids again. But the mom looked haunted even while hugging her dog, saying she'd never feel safe at dog parks again, never trust strangers who seemed friendly. They'd stolen more than pets from these families. They'd stolen their ability to feel secure in the world. The motion to dismiss my charges finally got ruled on after 6 months of waiting. The judge said my actions were justified under emergency circumstances since I was preventing ongoing animal cruelty, and Noah's trial got set for 8 months out while his brother took a plea deal for lesser charges. Jasmine suggested we use the waiting time to start a nonprofit helping other pet theft victims, and we filed the paperwork for Stolen Hearts Recovery Network, even though the IRS approval would take forever. Harold from the dog park started volunteering at the rescue where the recovered dogs were staying, bringing homemade peanut butter treats every day and just sitting with the scared ones for hours. His Shiba Inu Koji would play gentle games with the traumatized dogs, somehow knowing exactly how much energy each one could handle. It was beautiful watching dogs help heal other dogs, while us humans dealt with endless legal paperwork and court dates. One morning, while filling out more victim impact statements, I realized I hadn't thought about my ex in months. The breakup that had destroyed me last year felt like ancient history now, like it happened to a different person in a different life. Waffle hadn't just saved me from being lonely, he'd given me something bigger to care about than my own heartbreak. Then everything went to hell again when Ray called saying Anna was dead. They found her in her federal custody cell, supposed suicide by hanging, but her lawyer said she'd been getting death threats from other inmates connected to the network. She was supposed to testify in 3 more trials, and now all that testimony was gone. The FBI started investigating whether she'd been murdered to stop her from revealing more names, whether the network had people inside the federal prison system who could make problems disappear. Her lawyer went on the news saying Anna had been terrified for weeks, begging to be moved to protective custody, claiming guards were letting other inmates threaten her. Now the investigation wasn't just about pet theft anymore. It was about possible witness assassination, about a criminal network big enough to reach inside federal prisons and silence people. The next week at the courthouse, Noah's lawyer stood in front of the judge arguing that his client wasn't dangerous and deserved bail while awaiting trial. The prosecutor kept pointing out that a witness had just died under suspicious circumstances, but the judge wasn't buying it. He set bail at $2 million, and Noah walked out of the courthouse 3 hours later after someone wired the money from an offshore account. I watched him leave from across the street, my hands shaking as he climbed into a black SUV and disappeared into traffic. That night I called a security company and had them install panic buttons in every room, reinforced locks on all the doors and windows, and a system that would alert the police if anyone tried to break in. Jasmine started coming over after work to check on me and Waffle, bringing takeout and staying until I fell asleep on the couch. She'd cover me with a blanket and lock the door behind her, texting when she got home safe. After a few weeks, she just started staying over, keeping clothes in my closet and her toothbrush in the bathroom. We didn't talk about what it meant. Both of us focused on keeping Waffle safe and getting through each day without looking over our shoulders. 6 months passed and I thought maybe we were finally past past the worst of it when the local news ran a story that made my blood run cold. Another couple had stolen a dog from a park, using the exact same sob story about their lost pet, complete with fake photos and tears. The faces were different, but the pattern was identical, down to offering money for the dog they claimed was theirs. Connor's group had been watching for this, and they were ready with cameras and alerts set up across the city. Within days, they'd tracked the new thieves to a motel, where police arrested them with 3 stolen dogs in their van. The community had learned to protect itself, but it was clear the network had just replaced Noah and Elena with new people willing to do their dirty work. That night, Waffle woke up crying and thrashing in his sleep, his paws moving like he was running from something. I held him against my chest and whispered that he was safe, that no one would ever take him again. But the words felt hollow when I wasn't even sure I believed them myself. Some nights we both woke up at the smallest sound, checking the locks and staring out the windows at empty streets. The next morning brought unexpected hope when our nonprofit received its first major donation, $50,000 from a tech executive whose dog had been stolen years ago and never found. He wanted to fund a registry system for stolen pets that would make it harder for thieves to sell them across state lines. During all this, the prosecutor preparing for Noah's trial called with news that made everything make sense. Something feels off about Anna dying right before she could testify in those other trials. A witness with that much information suddenly having a suicide in federal custody? The timing is too perfect for the people she was about to expose. They'd found records of Noah making payments to a judge who had dismissed several animal cruelty cases over the years, payments totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. The FBI opened a new investigation into judicial corruption that went back a decade. Jasmine officially moved in the next week, though she framed it as being more convenient for helping with Waffle's ongoing anxiety issues. We both knew it was more than that, but neither of us wanted to name it. This thing growing between us that felt different from regular dating. Love that came from shared trauma felt deeper somehow, more necessary than the kind that grew from happiness and fun dates. 2 weeks later, I testified before Congress through a video link about pet theft networks and how they operated. My voice shook when I described finding Waffle in that shipping container, barely breathing and covered in his own waste. A senator promised they'd draft legislation to make pet theft a federal crime with mandatory prison time, but everyone knew political promises didn't mean much. 2 weeks before Noah's trial was set to start, I was sitting in a coffee shop when someone sat down across from me. Noah looked exactly the same as that day in the dog park, calm and ordinary like someone's dad or uncle. "You could have taken the money," he said quietly, stirring sugar into his coffee like we were old friends catching up. "Now you've destroyed dozens of families' livelihoods, people who were just trying to make a living in a tough economy." He stood up before I could respond, leaving his untouched coffee on the table. "Some things can't be undone," he said, and walked out while I sat there with my heart pounding, knowing that was a threat even if he'd been careful not to say it directly. The prosecutor called me 2 days later while I was making breakfast. She said Noah's lawyer wanted to meet about a possible deal. I drove to the courthouse that afternoon with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The meeting room smelled like old coffee and fear sweat. Noah's lawyer sat across from us shuffling papers while the prosecutor explained their offer. 15 years if Noah gave up everyone in the network. His lawyer laughed and said 5 years maximum. The prosecutor stood up and walked out. I followed her down the hallway wanting to scream that Noah deserved life in prison. She told me that wasn't going to happen no matter how much evidence we had. That night, another witness called me crying. Someone had left a dead cat on her doorstep with a note saying she was next. 2 more witnesses got similar threats over the next week. One of them withdrew from the case completely. The prosecutor said we still had enough evidence, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I started checking my locks 3 times before bed. Waffle wouldn't leave my side even to eat. Then one morning at the dog park, something amazing happened. Another golden retriever approached Waffle, and he didn't run away. He actually sniffed the other dog's butt like a normal dog would. They played fetch together for 10 minutes while I stood there crying behind my sunglasses. Other dog owners probably thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. My dog was learning to be a dog again, even if it was just for a few minutes. Connor called that afternoon with good news about the registry. 500 stolen pets had been entered in the first week alone. The software was finding patterns in the thefts across 6 states. He'd assembled a team of volunteers to manage the database and work with police departments. Technology was finally fighting back against these criminals. 3 days later, I woke up to 20 missed calls from the prosecutor. The FBI had raided Judge Harrison's house at dawn. They found $200,000 in cash hidden in his basement. He'd been taking bribes from Noah's network for 3 years. The judge flipped immediately and gave them evidence on 12 other people. The plea deal was off the table completely. Trial would start next week as scheduled. I threw up in my kitchen sink after hanging up. The first day of trial, I wore my only suit and sat in the witness chair for 4 hours. The prosecutor asked me about finding Waffle in the parking lot. She asked about the couple at the dog park and the warehouse rescue. Noah stared at me the entire time without blinking. 3 women on the jury were crying when I described the cages. One man kept looking at photos of his own dog on his phone during breaks. Sarah testified next with a laptop full of medical records. She showed photos of infected bite wounds and broken bones. She explained how malnutrition had damaged some dogs permanently. 2 jurors had to leave the room when she showed a video of a dog having seizures. The reality was worse than anything I'd imagined in that warehouse. Noah's lawyer stood up on day 3 and called me a vigilante. He said I'd stalked and harassed legitimate business people. He claimed the warehouse was a legal breeding facility with proper permits. Some jurors looked confused when he showed paperwork that seemed official. He painted me as an obsessed pet owner who'd lost touch with reality. Harold took the stand on day 4, and everything changed. The old man could barely speak through his tears. He talked about his wife dying of cancer 2 years ago. His son explained how Harold had bought sleeping pills after the funeral. Koji was the only reason he'd kept living after losing everything. When Harold described finding his dog gone, the entire courtroom went silent. Even Noah looked away from the old man's pain. The jury left to deliberate that afternoon. I sat in my apartment for 3 days hitting refresh on news websites every 30 seconds. Waffle pressed against my leg constantly like he knew something big was happening. Jasmine brought me food I couldn't eat and answered my work emails. She handled everything while I slowly lost my mind waiting for 12 strangers to decide our future. The call came Thursday morning while I was brushing my teeth. The jury had reached a verdict. I threw on the same clothes from yesterday and drove to the courthouse with Waffle in the back seat. The courtroom was packed with Every victim from the case, plus reporters and federal agents. Noah sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered. The judge asked the jury foreman to read the verdict, guilty on all counts. The room exploded with crying and cheering while Noah just stared at the table. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. I felt nothing at first, just empty. Then everything hit me at once and I had to sit down. Relief that it was over. Exhaustion from months of fear. Grief for the time we'd lost. Outside the courthouse, victims hugged each other and cried. Connor announced that the registry had helped recover 12 dogs just this month. Harold brought Koji, who immediately started playing with Waffle in the grass. The dogs didn't care about verdicts or justice. They just wanted to chase each other around the courthouse steps. That night, Jasmine came over and we sat on my couch with Waffle between us. "It's over," she said, but we both knew it wasn't really. Trauma doesn't end with verdicts, but we were together. All 3 survivors who'd made it through. A week later, I went back to my normal work schedule for the first time in months. Waffle started going to doggy daycare while I was at the office. Small steps toward normal life. The security cameras stayed up, but I stopped carrying the panic button. The nonprofit got federal funding to expand nationally 3 months later. They made me executive director with a real salary that covered Waffle's ongoing therapy and medical bills. Purpose from pain became my actual job. 6 months after the verdict, Waffle still flinched at certain sounds. I still checked the locks 3 times before bed. Healing wasn't a straight line, but Waffle played fetch every day now, and I slept through most nights without nightmares. A documentary crew came to interview us about the case. Watching the footage later, I barely recognized myself. Harder, but stronger. Waffle slept through the whole interview, finally feeling safe enough to relax. Connor got married the next spring and made a whole table for survivors at his wedding. 7 families brought together by the worst thing that ever happened to us. Our dogs were the ring bearers. Harold made a toast about finding family in the worst places. Jasmine and I bought a house together with a big yard. Waffle inspected every corner before claiming a sunny spot by the window. We adopted one of the unclaimed dogs from the case who never found his family. A sweet lab mix who needed a home. Healing happened through helping others heal. At the dog park yesterday, Waffle played with a group of dogs while I threw tennis balls. A woman mentioned her puppy got stolen last week. I handed her a card for the nonprofit and called Ray right there. The work continues, but we're not alone anymore. Waffle barked happily and chased his ball into the sunshine, finally free. Man, what a journey that was. Thanks for coming along and wandering through it all with me. Can't wait to do it again soon. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.